For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dhlamini. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss erasing Luthuli. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
You refer to the neglect of Chief Albert Luthuli's legacies by the ANC as well as the state. Why do you think this is happening?
Yeah, I should say that since I wrote that article, there is an article today in the Daily Maverick by Zweli Mkhize on Luthuli, and that is the first contribution that I've seen by the ANC on Luthuli for this 50th anniversary. The reason why I think Luthuli is neglected is part of a general depoliticization of the ANC. That when I was involved, we used to discuss the history. We would discuss ideas. For example, Zweli Mkhize says Luthuli chose the ANC over the chieftaincy. Now, that would have been something we would have argued about. Did he choose one or the other, or did he refuse to choose and the government deposed him? Now, I'm not saying this to criticize Zweli Mkhize's article. I'm really saying this to say that the sort of things that we used to debate are now just part of what is. He thought perhaps this is an uncontentious statement. Personally, I think it's contentious and it's very debatable because for Luthuli, there were a number of identities that he had, and one of them was being the chief. He didn't rate it higher or lower than Christianity or the ANC. They were all part of his personality. So he didn't choose one or the other. The government chose one rather than the other. But what I think is that the ANC has entered a period where it is not really a political organization in the sense of debating ideas. Now, in 1990 to 1994, there were a lot of ideas debated, and we would invoke lessons about different leaders. You would be told, for example, as Zweli Mkhize mentions that Luthuli was a great listener. Now, one of the qualities of leadership, when we would look at Luthuli to ask, what can one tell branches, provinces, regions about the leadership of Luthuli? And one of the things that one would tell them perhaps is that if someone came to ask Luthuli for advice, he would not give them advice just like that. He would wait and think and listen and ask questions, because a great leader doesn't just dish out advice, especially in a time of danger. Because if you give advice to someone and they act on it in the period of apartheid, but even today, you can give advice that can harm the person, or you can give advice that can help them. And you've got to be very responsible about it. In order to be that, you've got to listen. But also, Luthuli was a visionary leader, but he wasn't a visionary leader purely because his brains were so powerful and all of that. He was a visionary leader because he embraced in his vision of freedom the aspirations, the pain, the hardships that people experienced, so that there was a relationship. And listening was not just that he was polite. Listening informed the vision that he and the ANC of the time had, that led to them having a big following. I also think that the ANC of today, as we know, is comprised of a large number of people who are members, but then there's within that a number of people who are jostling for positions. Because when they get positions, they hope that they will get higher salaries or some remuneration at all, or they'll get on deals or contracts. And people are not joining the ANC now for visions and for its history and for its great leaders. Obviously, they can't ignore Mandela and Tambo, especially since this has been declared a year commemorating Tambo. But because they are not talking politics and talking the ANC history as we used to do, it's easier for them to forget Luthuli. But I also think that Luthuli represents some things that are a reproach to the leadership of today. His integrity, his notion of service, what he calls the gospel of service, is very, very important to resuscitate in the present day, not just for the ANC, but for us as citizens of the country.
So what then are these qualities that you believe need to be remembered?
You know, I mentioned service, the gospel of service. I can't remember exactly what else I mentioned, but there were a couple of things that are neglected, which I think are very important. Luthuli was not a trained theologian, but in some ways he was an embryonic liberation theologist. He was very influenced by the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, and the title of his book is Let My People Go. And that notion of letting my people go is a very important part of many of African American spirituals and of political movements, freedom movements that draw on the prophets in the Old Testament. And it comes from Moses going to Pharaoh when the Israelites were held in slavery in Egypt and saying to him, "My Lord says, let my people go." And that title is important. And throughout the book you can see Luthuli is drawing on a particular theology. He says he does this, what he's doing now, he doesn't do because some foreign people have put these ideas into his head. He does this because he is a human being created in God's image. And to racism is an abomination, a sin against the Lord. So his Christianity and his politics are very tied to one another. You see this in the passage that I quote, where he is deposed as a chief, and he says he doesn't know what the future holds for him. But some people, some families must be prepared to sacrifice. The road to freedom is via the cross. In other words, he envisages the possibility of dying or being killed. Other thing that I didn't pay enough attention to is the question of non-violence, and I think it's very complex. My research shows that Luthuli didn't oppose the armed struggle. He didn't want armed struggle, but when protests were being drowned in blood and people took a decision to form MK and act in self-defense, Luthuli came to accept the intransigence of the regime made that necessary. He did not himself take up arms, but when Mandela, Sisulu and others were convicted in the Rivonia trial, he said, "Who can blame brave men in this situation for taking up arms to resist oppression?" So, but that didn't mean that Luthuli was repudiating the principle of non-violence. The principle of non-violence, as I understand him, is universally applicable, except when a condition occurs which temporarily makes it necessary to use force to prevent something grave from happening. For example, if your child is threatened or something like that, he says, if someone tries to take my chickens, I will fight for it. Now, when MK was formed, that was a conditional, temporary departure from the principle of non-violence. Once peace is established, non-violence is absolutely applicable with no exceptions. And if there's an exception, it is essentially temporary. So that is something that I thought is very important to emphasize, that MK didn't mean that non-violence is now no longer a principle. We need to return to the importance of peace, because the reason why we want peace is because not the whites who were dying, but the ordinary oppressed people of South Africa. There are many other facets of his life related to service and ethics that need to be unpacked. It's very important we don't just say ethical leadership or service. We need to say, what does it mean? In my view, the main thing is the gospel of service was chosen by Luthuli as opposed to the gospel of greed, which has been chosen today. It's our job to ensure that the gospel of service is put in place again.
Thank you, Professor. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Crema Media's Polity about erasing Luthuli.